Hello.
Hello, how are you, Steve?
Hey, is that Evan?
This is.
Hey, I wanted to thank you again for the CCISSP mentor program. I went through the whole thing, and I'm still going back through the recordings. And I did take a local college for the last couple of weeks, and but you guys are like my companions going.
Good.
Yeah, I did have a question for you on the test on the last Thursday night a few weeks ago. The live test you went through with that link. I think it was CC Cure or something like that.
Yeah, yep.
Did you guys choose that over others that you looked at because it most accurately represented the test environment as well as the content? Or
No, we chose that one. The guy who runs that site is a guy named Clement Dupuis, and he's been around since even when I took the exam back in 2005.
uh-huh.
So he's just been kind of one that lots and lots and lots of people have used before.
Okay. So what we're the syllabus they gave us over here at the local college is the Cybex one, the one that's thick as a phone book, and it's got something like 1,500 questions, flashcards. I mean, I don't see how many different ways you could ask the same questions across 8 domains. So I've been going
Right.
through that, and they have an online test companion link. You buy the book, you register it. So I've been mostly using that, using your material and the stuff that this instructor we had went through. So I imagine, I cross read it so I don't miss anything.
Good. Good. Well, let us know if there's anything else we can do to help. We just had a call, just actually half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, with ISSA, which is a big association in our industry, to partner with them to offer free CISSP training. So this hopefully will become a movement that you'll be able to get all kinds of different ways,
Yeah.
and not just have to wait once a year when we do it.
Mhm.
But I'm
Okay.
glad you got some value out of it. Hopefully, do you have your exam scheduled?
I am right now. I'm wanting to feel good about the end of July. I've noticed over the last 7 weeks that I've been pursuing this that I'm getting this mode where I'm passing most of the test. I pass a lot, just about every pop-up quiz in the class. I'm getting better at some areas that I didn't have the necessary depth. I come from a real deep network infrastructure and security background, practitioner and engineer. A lot of the regulatory stuff, a lot of the deep dive into crypto, things that I'm really augmenting through this. Your material's been invaluable and combined with the others. So,
Good, good. I'm glad to hear it.
well, I go through this stuff, and as I go through it, I'm thinking, aha, I've seen that 4 or 5 other places. That's the right answer. Now let me remember why it was the right answer. I mean, I'm getting to that point, and what I find I'm getting real good at is the immediate elimination of 50% of the fluff in a question. I hear what you guys are right. That's half the battle right there, is knowing what is not applicable.
Yep, very true. Very true. All right, is Brandon with us? Brandon, do you do the intro thing, or do I? We have a small group today. I'm guessing Brandon is trying to figure out how to take care of his mute. Maybe not. Well, anyway, we'll get started. We have a small group today, so we have. Oh, you're unmuted.
Yep. My camera's not working, but I can hear you guys. You guys sound good.
Okay. So should we get started?
Yeah, we can go ahead and get started whenever you are ready.
Cool. I'm ready. Ready enough. So what? This is chapter 4 of the book Pipe Dreams. Hopefully everybody's doing well. We have looks like a small group today, so if anybody wants to chime in, you can raise your hand. If you look to the right, if you get the kind of the participants task, your sidebar open, there's a place where you can raise your hand, and you can see that I raised my hand. It's like I'm giving you guys a high five or something. So if you want to do that, and then either I can unmute you or you can unmute you, or you can type something into the group chat too, and we can talk about stuff. It's nice when you have a smaller group, because then I think people feel maybe, one, a little less intimidated to speak, and two, there's more of an opportunity, if other people are speaking. So where have I been? What have I been doing? Hopefully, things are always so busy with information security. Last week I was, we were just talking to Steve. Steve was in our CISSP mentor program. There's some kind of exciting things happening there. The last chapter of our book is about this talent shortage problem that we have in our industry. Estimated 300,000 short today, meaning we've got 300,000 open positions and nobody to fill them. Expected to be 1.8 to 2.2 million in the next 3-4 years maybe. So job prospects are awesome for people wanting to get into our industry. That's why that CISSP mentor program is such a big deal, because it's one thing to write in a book, these are all the things that are broken and these are the things I think we can do to fix it. It's another thing to actually get off your bum and do something about it. That's why we do it. Along those same lines, I was just in a call I was saying earlier today with ISSA, the International, whatever they stand for. But they're one of the premier, I guess, trade associations for us in our industry. And it sounds like we might partner up on the CISSP mentor program, which is, that free training. So that'll be pretty exciting. Last week I was in the University of Miami teaching their security people some things for 4 days, and then I was in Iowa, and now I'm back, so kind of all over the place. Hopefully that's not a big deal. So this is Pipe Dreams. This is chapter 4 of a riveting information security book. Chapter 1 we talked about 3-4 months ago maybe, which was we're not speaking the same language, and it was kind of neat because I knew some of the people that were in that class or in that hangout then, and it was interesting. So one of the points in the book is that we don't speak the same language in our own tribe, and you can take an example of just what is information security, and if you ask 10 of us that same question, you'll get 12 different answers. And it was interesting because one of the people I know and respect in this industry had his own definition, which was different than my definition, which sort of made the point back on chapter 1. Chapter 2 is about the foundation. It was about establishing kind of the non-sexy parts of information security. I mean, building foundations aren't sexy. They're hard work. They're dirty. The same thing applies with an information security program. Things like asset management, policy, governance, all that stuff isn't really that exciting, but it's really, really important to our security. And what we see in the industry is most people aren't focused on that. They miss the foundation and they focus on kind of the peripheral things, like maybe the paint color on the 3rd floor of your house. 3rd floor, man, that'd be a big house. Anyway, that's chapter 2. Chapter 3, we covered lipstick on a pig, which is kind of I didn't realize there was such a political thing with lipstick on a pig, but it's just how we dress things up, make things appear to be better than they are, and how that doesn't really serve us well, and it doesn't serve our partners well, it doesn't serve our organizations well. Today is chapter 4, which is Pipe Dreams. And this book, by the way, is currently with the publisher people, and I've never done a book before, and I realized being I'd never done a book before, I wrote too much. So I wrote 500 pages, and I guess these things are supposed to be like 250 to 300 pages, so they have a lot of shedding to do on that book. I also didn't realize that you weren't supposed to write a book in 2 months, so that sort of got me in deep water. But chapter 4, pipe dreams, really the problems. I'll go over just kind of briefly what pipe dreams are, and maybe some of this stuff will resonate. Maybe some of the stuff that I already talked about will resonate, kind of with what you do or in your own information security programs. It'll make sense. Oh, Shelly went. Oh yeah, Shelly, we're like LinkedIn buddies. We've had some chats there before, and she was also in the CISSP mentor program. Hopefully you got value out of that. We're always looking for not just the positive stuff about that program either. I mean, if there are things that you think that we could be more effective in and the way we do that, we're always open to that. So pipe dreams, and this is like, Hangouts too for me. I keep going all over the place, but this is how I roll. Hangouts for me are kind of weird because I sit in a room, Brandon's in another room, and I sit here and I just talk, and I don't have really much in terms of interaction or somebody to talk with. Last month, we had Brian McGowan to talk with, but he's not available today, so you just get me. So the problems around pipe dreams, I think, really stem from, and I'll go through some of the things about, where the chapter sort of opens. I give people the choice of two choices of 3 words. So one, and they're antonyms of each other. So the first 3 words are ignorance, panic, and fantasy. The other 3 words are understanding, calm, and reality. And pick one. Pick 1 or 2. And if you're honest, it's 1. We have a lot of ignorance, a lot of panic, and a lot of fantasy in what we do in information security. There's oftentimes we're not facing kind of the facts of what we're dealing with. If we did, we'd see a lot better security programs, I think. So when you open up with ignorance was the first word. And I talk to, as you'd expect, lots of organizations sort of every day. And ignorance, it wasn't that long ago, I'd say 5 years ago maybe, when ignorance was defensible. So when a bad thing happened, the board or executive management could claim, geez, we didn't know. And that was defensible. Well, today, it's no longer defensible. Claiming that you didn't know isn't a defense when a bad thing happens. But ignorance itself, I mean, there's different types of ignorance. There's the ignorance in just not knowing. And that sort of, can be defensible. Nobody knows everything. Some of the people I work with every day have 20, 25 years of experience. And we're still learning stuff. I mean, we're still coming across things that we didn't think of before, new kind of innovative ways of doing things. So that first type of ignorance, which they call, let me give you the word, 3 types of ignorance. The first type is ordinary ignorance. That's ordinary ignorance, when you just don't know everything. The second type of ignorance is willful ignorance. And willful ignorance is, there's lots of examples, and there's examples, in this chapter of where we've come across willful ignorance. And one that, I always remember is, it was this big tech company, and they had, this is maybe 10 years ago, the big tech company, and they had a virus. It was a virus/worm outbreak on their network, and they'd spent, better part of 2 days trying to clean this thing up before they called anybody. So when they called, we worked together. We got our hands around it. Took probably almost another day. So you're talking about 2.5, maybe 3 days of downtime. And when we were in kind of putting things together, it became pretty obvious that there were some controls that were missing, patches that weren't being applied regularly, antivirus, just a lot of different things that we thought the company could do to make things better going forward. And so when we finished up the incident investigation, that was the thing that we asked was, would you like us to write a report or give you some advice on things that you can do to make this better? And the CIO of this organization essentially said no, because if we know about it, then we have to do something about it. And so it's like, that logically that doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's an example of kind of willful ignorance, where you purposely either deny facts or you purposely don't look at facts. There's a bunch of examples of that willful ignorance. The third type, and this is from a PhD psychology type person, not from me, is higher ignorance, which is kind of out there a little bit. It doesn't really apply as much to our industry as does willful ignorance and ordinary ignorance. So in that book, and I can think, and if I think hard enough, I can think of examples over and over and over again, even as recent as yesterday, of places where you find kind of this willful ignorance, which just compounds our problems when you take that we're not speaking the same language, we don't have a foundation, we make things look better than they appear, and then you couple that with ignorance. It's a recipe for disaster, and it'd be nice to say that these things were very unique. We don't come across them very often, but that's not the truth. The truth is we do come across it too often. So talking through ignorance, you'll find in the chapter when the book is finally, on the shelves. Other examples of willful ignorance, I just give some of the things that we've heard that aren't uncommon. One is we don't want a risk assessment because then we have to fix all the things that we know about. Not only is that ignorance or willful ignorance, but it's also not true. Just because you know about risks doesn't mean you have to fix them. It's about risk management. It's not about risk elimination. So, there are ways to combat a lot of these ignorant kind of excuses for the way things are done. And I would advise, if you work with the executive management and board of directors, be careful with the word ignorant. I don't think they like it much. Other examples, excuse me, I have to have a drink. Penetration tests will just make more work for us. Here's a common one. Just get us compliant. We don't want to know about all the other things. Things that actually make us more secure. Just check the box is a common ignorance ploy. This has happened to us numerous times. One of our core values, it is our number one core value. Excuse me. I'm coming off a cold too, combined with all this other crap going on. Our number one core value is we tell the truth. It's kind of trumps all the rest of our core values. Not that any one of them is negotiable. So when we find things or we find bad things or we write reports, we tell the truth. Now, there's ways you can tell the truth to make it a little less blunt, but when we go to the board of directors and we tell them, look, this is what your FISA score is. If we're using FISA score, it's a 400. Well, that doesn't sit well sometimes. So one of the things we've heard before is, that an organization isn't pleased with the things that we found because of that. They don't want to know, the truth. That happens occasionally. It's not very common, but it does. Excuse me. All right, so that was our first one. That was ignorance. The next one was panic. And I found, kind of in my own life and career, and it doesn't really matter what we're talking about, the better I know something, the better I know how something operates or truly what the risks are, the less fear I have, and therefore the less panic. We have a saying, I've been through, and most of us here have been through a lot of incident responses before. And it's almost off-putting when you call us for an incident response and we're not panicking when others might be in the room. Sometimes it's taken the wrong way, as though we don't care or we're not vested in this. It's more, there's no need to panic on a lot of security things because you do understand fundamentally how a lot of things work. So panic is just another one of those things where I think when you go to those three things, ignorance, panic, and what was the third one again, and fantasy, panic really comes from just a lack of understanding. So they really do fit well together. Ignorance and panic, they play off of each other really well. But sometimes we induce panic. Sometimes panic is used to get you to do things that maybe aren't in your best interest. Maybe they're used to have you purchase something a new service, a new tool. And last year, there were some really good examples of that. One of those was WannaCry. WannaCry was one of those things that was covered in the news sort of everywhere. And you would have thought, based on some of the things that you might have read, that the end of the world was near. It is probably near, but not because of WannaCry. And so the news was, I'm just going to read, some of the things that were said. One of the experts, and he's actually, I know who he is. One of the information security experts called WannaCry a bloodbath. Now, the word bloodbath, I think, has meaning to it. So, I don't use that word very often because I think it's pretty rare that you would need to. But due to kind of the terms and the phrases that we use, and he actually, has his own business and he's selling things, but panic sort of reigned. So put it in perspective a little bit. The bloodbath, it turned out turned out over 4 days. It was about 4 days when it was sort of running rampant. It compromised approximately 300,000 systems. When you put that into context with the systems, that are available for compromise due to the bloodbath, 300,000 systems turns out to be 0.003% of the systems worldwide. So when you put it in perspective, maybe it's not as much of a bloodbath as we think it is. Oftentimes it just creates, more panic. But that panic sometimes is done on purpose. So protecting yourself from panic really comes down to less ignorance. And I'll keep talking. Any questions? You guys have anything for me? You guys have any examples of you're on your own of ignorance, panic? If you do, type it in or raise your hand and we can talk about it. It'll be less boring than just sitting here listening to me ramble on. Other panic stuff. Now, this was after WannaCry, but I think probably equally as newsworthy was Spectre and Meltdown recently. Equifax, that brings us a little closer to, I think, to a panic level because that whole system is fundamentally, broken. But rarely does panic do you any good. So that's kind of the second thing in this chapter. Fantasy is the third part. And so fantasy is setting expectations. I go through the same thing with relationships, even my wife, right? Where's my expectation? Expectations oftentimes will dictate disappointment. If your expectations are too lofty, that's fantasy. And so the point of the book is we know logically that no matter what we do, no matter what any organization can do, you can't prevent all bad things from happening, period. So it's not about risk elimination, it's about risk management. And knowing that we can't prevent all bad things from happening, then we need to have things in place to detect and respond. And we're seeing a change now, I think, in our industry, but people get pretty ticked off when you lose their information, and I get that. But if you know that no matter what we do, we can't not lose your information, it takes a little bit of the sting off. But it also helps when I'm devising or implementing security controls to protect your information. The average dwell time today in a network ranges anywhere from 100 to, I've seen 170 and even 200 days, depending on which study you read. That means that a network or a system or data was compromised 100, 170, 200 plus days ago before you detect it. And then your response takes that out further. Before you actually get notified of some of these things, it might even be over a year. So when you're building a security program, understanding that it's not prevention at all costs, where I can't prevent things, what do I have in place to detect those things? And we still struggle, many organizations still struggle with getting their hands around detection processes. And then what's my response? we talk about defensibility. It's quickly becoming indefensible to not have an incident management program, to not have an incident response program, because logically you know that eventually someday you're going to need it. So that's all fantasy stuff. And it's one thing for us to know it. It's one thing for me to know it as an information security person. It's another thing for executive management to know it. Plenty of examples over the years of times when I've talked to executive management or I've talked to boards of directors, individual members, and I've explained to them that this same thing, we can't, no matter what we do, how much money we spend, how many people we get, we can't prevent breaches from happening. It still amazes me that it's a shock to some of them. They still actually believe that it's possible for us to prevent breaches from occurring. So that's fantasy. It's working with not just you, but in other languages that are spoken in your organization and in between organizations, understanding that this is about risk management. And so information security then is always relative. It's somewhere on the scale. There's no such thing as, we use what's called the FISA score. You can't get an 850 on a FISA score. That's risk elimination. You can't get a 300, which would essentially mean, infinite risk. It's always somewhere in between that, and plotting where that is, and then setting appropriate expectations of where to go from there. Other examples of, I think fantasy is moving an information security program from a 400 to a 600 overnight or in a quarter. It doesn't work like that. It takes time to build a security program. It doesn't matter how much resources you throw at it either. For security programs really to be effective, they have to stick. And for things to stick, the culture has to change. So those are all examples of, I think fantasy when we're working with executive management, setting the right expectations for ourselves and for the organization. Prevention, lots of stuff about prevention. And I was at an InfraGard meeting, really well attended InfraGard meeting in Sioux Falls last year, and I challenged the people that were there to try to measure how much time you spend each month on detection and response, and try to double it. Try to double the time, because you're going to need those things, and if you're not spending time and effort on detection and response, I think you'll get caught at the end, because prevention, we all focus on prevention. Prevention comes naturally to most of us now. Man, my nose is running too. It's cold. All right, so that's the broken stuff, setting expectations, all that stuff. Some of the things that are in place or that we should consider. They're ideas to fix some of the broken problems or brokenness of our industry. So we need to figure out ways to battle ignorance, and there's lots of different ways. One of the things we do with is education, right? The more we make people aware of how security works and how the role that they play and how they can, be better themselves, we lower that bar for ignorance. No matter how far we go, we're not going to eliminate ignorance, but how can we get people more involved? How can we educate the executives that you need to look at? Well, I'll give you another example of this. Really, really big law firm. We did a FISA score for this law firm, and they scored below 500. Now, below 500 is in that very poor range. That's really bad. And one of the lawyers in this room, it was a whole conference room filled with, a bunch of lawyers, and one of them said, well, great, now we're, what was the word he said? Now we can be held liable because we know. And that's the fallacy of ignorance. That's because it's not true. Because another one of the lawyers who, got it right, and it was a great discussion between them, said it's not true. Even if we move the bar from let's just say it was a 480. If we move the bar from a 480 to 485, we're still very poor, but we can demonstrate that we've made improvement. That's defensible. So using kind of that education process and seeing it play out was really kind of cool, because it's completely true. It's moving the bar forward. It's keeping, getting it to an acceptable level. Say risk, if you're using a risk measurement, whatever metric you're using, getting risk to an acceptable level and then maintaining it. That's defensible. Not knowing, not doing assessments, not conducting risk management, that's not defensible. But anyway, so training and awareness. So that's certain people that make decisions in the organization. We also have the normal people, and I call the normal people everybody else, right? If you remember speaking the same language in chapter 1, there are about 800,000. There's 300,000 open positions. About 900,000 information security professionals today in the United States, and there's 327 million normal people. Those are the normal people, the people that don't speak our language, the people that just don't, they don't get it because they're not supposed to. I mean, they don't live it like a lot of the rest of us do. So how do we make them more or less ignorant? Because if they're less ignorant, they'll protect the organization better. We've seen traditionally the way we've tried to do it is, information security training and awareness programs. But the programs that we've done have been largely ineffective because they're mandatory, they're dry, they're not fun. There's a lot of reasons why, because people don't like mandatory training. People like training that they like to go to. Even calling it training now sort of hurts, because we've kind of ruined that a little bit. But making information security training and awareness fun, gamifying information security training and awareness, making it relevant. There's a bunch of things that are in a lot of information security training programs that are things that don't apply to me specifically, so I don't pay attention to it. It's dry stuff that applies to somebody else within the organization. So making information security training and awareness programs more role dependent, assuming you've defined the roles in the organization, and then making it competitive. A lot of people like to compete. They like getting things for doing things, giving away, gift cards. And so we've seen these things play out in some organizations, but as an industry as a whole, most of us are still stuck on the drier types of information security training and awareness, which doesn't help us on the ignorance piece. Another thing to battle the pipe dreams problem is really driving home risk management. Information security is not compliance. It's not about compliance. It's not about check boxes. It's about risk management. Really driving that home and understanding, setting appropriate expectations around risk management. Getting into a cycle of, and I was saying this yesterday, I was in Iowa. I met, 6 companies yesterday in Iowa, and we were talking through some of these things. And I've always, for years and years, we struggled so hard to get board time. We just wanted, just give me 5 minutes of the board of directors so I can tell them, what security really looks like and whatever. So then it happened, and it's happening more and more often, where we're getting 5 minutes with the board of directors. It's like, oh crap, now I got to figure out what I'm going to tell them. So the 5 things that I always tell boards of directors is, what's our current state, what's our future state, when are we going to get there, and how much is it going to cost? That's 4 things. The 5th thing is, what's the current number 1 thing that we're working on? And that's it. It's a 5-minute discussion with the board of directors. If they have additional questions, that's great, because they're driving the conversation. Most organizations can't do that. They can't demonstrate those 5 things in 5 minutes. And that's where we need to get to. We need to get to what's our current state. Now the book isn't selling FRSecure or FISA score, any of that other stuff. But like I said, when I opened up kind of today, for us just to preach it and not live it, for us not to eat our own dog food, would be hypocrisy. So this is what we obsess about. We obsess about fixing these problems. So what we use is the FISA score. We can tell you the current FISA score. We can tell you what your FISA score, target FISA score is. We can tell you when you're going to get there, how much it's going to cost, and your most significant risk is probably the one thing that you're working on right now. So those are the 5 things. Where are we at? Where are we going? When are we getting there? How much it's going to cost? What's the thing right now? So getting organizations, and it doesn't matter. I mean, we use FISA score, but if you use something else, fine, use something else. But it's getting into this just normal discussion of what risk management is here, and simplifying it. I mean, you don't have to get crazy about this is our definition of risk. This is a this is a the difference between qualified or a quantified risk assessment, or you don't have to go into threats and vulnerabilities and metrics and all that other stuff. Simplify it, speak their language. This is where we're at, this is where we're going, this is where we're getting there, this is how much it's going to cost. So it battles ignorance, and it certainly sets expectations appropriately, as you're driving forward. Other good benefits of kind of getting into an ecosystem like that is budgets are established. If everybody agrees that this is our target risk and this is how much it's going to cost, everybody's on the same page, the budget sits there. If people are happy in the organization, the business makes risk decisions. It's not me, it's not security people who make risk decisions. If the business is happy, we have businesses like this, believe it or not, if they're happy with a 500 FISA score, then so be it. We can consult them on why that's not a good choice, but at the end of the day, your eyes are wide open, you have the facts, and you accept the risk. At least we have the right expectations then. So when something bad happens, it's not as much, or shouldn't be as much of a surprise. What I think will be a surprise is realizing that 500 FISA score is discoverable after the breach, when litigation happens and all that stuff. But we've advised that. Then there's things that are important in that system. So if you choose FISA score, then that's one. But really, this book doesn't even mention that. The book really mentions more. This is how you build something like that. So it goes back to our definitions of information security and risk and assessments and those things, because we have to constantly be reminded of those things until it becomes part of just our normal, what's the word I'm looking for? Normal words, vocabulary, good enough. Things that make a bad information security assessment or risk assessment: subjectivity. So this is where you're using judgments and opinions versus factual information. Now, facts don't have to be dollars and cents. Facts can be yeses and nos. Facts can be ones and zeros. Facts can be whatever you're going to use. It's either it is or it isn't. Those are what I'm talking about in terms of factual, objective. But having a risk assessment that is subjective, it defeats the process of getting that cycle rolling. An assessment that doesn't reflect risk at all, obviously that's should be self-explanatory, and why that wouldn't be good. No data support, cookie cutter recommendations that don't fit for the organization, metric manipulation, narrow focus, one use only. If you're going to be on a cycle, the same assessment that you did last year needs to be the same assessment that you do this year and the year after and the year after. It doesn't have to be the same people doing the assessment, but having the same assessment and methodology is very important. Otherwise, you keep kind of resetting yourself. It's hard enough to get the board speaking our language in what to accept, because the first time you go into the board and say, hey, here's our current FISA score, here's our target FISA score, here's this and that and whatever else, or whatever you're using, what the hell's a FISA score? What's it based on? Who else is using it? How do we compare with other people? I mean, they ask a bunch of different questions that you have to get out of the way that first time you kind of fight through this. But then they grow to expect it. It becomes a quarterly thing. This is the FISA score. This is where, all that stuff is cool. Detection response, I mentioned before, spending more time, more effort on detection and response. Not that we necessarily lessen the time and effort on prevention, but maybe we do. Your time management better than I do. What else do I have in here? Yes, every organization has to. I mean, it's funny because you still talk to organizations all the time, and like I was talking to one yesterday, big healthcare organization, and got a lot of really cool things, and they're really innovative. They have one of their ways of detecting ransomware, which I thought was pretty cool, is I set up a honeypot, and when that honeypot gets infected, it'll, do a bunch of things. And I thought, man, that's pretty cool that you guys developed that yourself internally. And so we were talking about more things, and I was like, so tell me what security looks like at, kind of at a broad level, like how things are run. They said, well, it's not really treated so much like it's a business issue, even though it is. And then it came out, well, we don't do risk assessments. We don't do information security risk assessments. I'm like, well, then how do you know where to spend your next information security dollar if you don't have some indication? Do you just go by gut feel, or do you go by what you read in the news? Or what's that basis? What are those facts? And it turns out that is what it is. But I just can't imagine. I always approach a lot of consulting engagement. I don't do much consulting anymore in projects per se. But I can't imagine hiring me as a CISO, as a Chief Information Security Officer, off the street and not doing an assessment. I don't know how I would establish any budgets. I don't know how I'd, focus the team on the things that are most significant. So risk assessments, risk management, risk assessments are part of risk management. So consistently doing those things, at least, well, now, the shorter the time period, the better, but at least annually. And whether you do them externally or you do them internally, you do this methodology or that methodology, isn't as important as doing them and then refining that process as you go further. You'll find that as you do those often, and the thing is too, if you use somebody external, that cost, the most expensive one is the first one, because the costs go down because there's a lot more focus then on what things have changed. The methodology itself should account for what's changed in terms of the world environment, like threats and vulnerabilities. So the cost should lower over time. And the more you do assessments, the more you understand your systems, the more you understand where the risks are. The more you understand what the risks are, the less fear you have of the unknown, the less panic you have when a bad thing happens. If in some cases you already kind of expected the bad thing to happen in that one place where you accepted the risk. So panic is not really a thing anymore. Now your customers, how you communicate with customers and all those other things, that's another story. But and maintaining, some people just panic no matter what. Maybe they're not good to lead your incident response team. And then when people call bloodbath, put things into perspective. What is a bloodbath? How big of a deal is it really? Everything sort of is a big deal if you make it a big deal. So all that stuff. Then reality is about, really discerning facts from opinions. Everybody's got an opinion. What do they say? Opinions are like, you're behind. I don't know if I can say that if it's politically correct, because that's kind of the world we live in. But opinions are like, you're behind. Everybody's got one. And most of them stink. But you have to. The more you understand security in your own organization, the more you work through these things, which none of them are. Well, I guess it depends on your attitude, but none of them are all that exciting. But you'll be able to discern facts then from opinions. When people tell you things or want to sell you things or whatever, you'll be much more discerning on what's best for you. That's also in this chapter. It's not really that long of a chapter. I think it's in this draft. It's 20 pages, so pretty easy to read this chapter. Tips and tricks on how to set expectations with your CEO, your C-level executives, and the board of directors, and all those things. I think oftentimes we don't even ask necessarily what their expectations are. So if I have FaceTime with the CEO, if I have FaceTime with the CFO or CIO or whoever, just asking the simple question, what are your expectations of this security program? You'll find that they don't have any. Well, that's sort of okay. That's sort of great, actually, because now I can maybe give you some. And if you do have expectations that are unrealistic, I can set them where they are more realistic. We can have a discussion about why 100% prevention isn't the thing. One of the things I've gotten so many times from CEOs is just keep us out of the news. Okay, I mean, we could maybe still have a breach and maybe stay out of the news. I don't know if that's possible or not, but if that's our focus, that's the expectation, it's probably not realistic either. So it just depends. But have that discussion with the C-level executives. Ask them straight out, what do you expect from this information security program? So that we can meet with what your expectations are with what reality is. And maybe your expectations, if you're a CEO or a C-level executive who has been involved in information security before, maybe your expectations are dead on, and we're just going to be on the same page and build a beautiful partnership here. But can't overlook expectations. Not having any expectations is not true. Everybody's always got expectations. In the book, there are examples of places where expectations were sorely missed and some of the consequences of those missed expectations, ranging from Marissa Mayer at Yahoo, missing her multi-million-dollar bonus when she stepped aside, Greg Steinhoffel and his resigning at Target, Richard Smith, him leaving or retiring from Equifax after the breach. Lots of different stories. Amy Pascal, she was the chief at Sony and during all that stuff. So good stuff. Set those expectations, and then make sure that when those expectations are set, then they can be anything from what do you expect of the security program itself? What do you expect in terms of updates about the security program? How often do you expect updates? All those things are really good. Stakeholders, what do they expect? I got something right here. Yeah, I mean, my job, and I think your job, if you are an information security person, and say you're a CISO at an organization, it's my job to give the CEO the best, and the board, and whatever other stakeholders, the best information possible to make really good risk decisions. And I said that yesterday to the CEO at the American Rental Association, which I didn't even know there was such a thing, down in Davenport or close to Davenport. Really cool organization. And I was talking to the CEO about this very thing. The security program here needs to feed you just with the information you need to know to make these good decisions, right? To protect your members and all this other stuff. And that really, really resonated with him. He's like, yeah, I'd love to have good information to make good decisions. And being the CEO at this company, that's the same thing I strive for. Just give me good information. Don't give me all the details and numbers. I want good information to make good decisions. That's my job as a CISO, is to give you good, solid information to do those things. Because at the end of the day, I'm not the one making them. You are. And if you don't even know what they are, well, then we're back to ignorance again. Yeah, and it's easier said than done. In a lot of cases, easier said than done to get stakeholders, to get boards, to get CEOs involved in risk decision making. And I think it's a lot of it, we've brought on ourselves in terms of why we have so much trouble there. We like to get more technical. When we do talk about information security, it's such a broad topic. A lot of times we pick a thing that, and then another thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. And it doesn't take very long before you get a couple of things, and you've lost their attention, you don't get invited back. So stay focused on those 5 things if you can figure out what those are. Current state, future state, when we're getting there, how much it's going to cost, and what's the thing right now. And that's all I got. We're at 2:50. You guys let me ramble on for 50 minutes. Nobody had a question. Well, maybe you did, but you didn't ask it. Anything you guys want to add? Anything that made sense, didn't make sense in this Hangout? I think next time we'll have somebody else join me in this thing. All right. Are you guys still awake? At least give me like I'm an awake thing. Raise your hand to tell me if you're awake.
Awake.
Yes, we got one.
I think your commentary about the use of hyperbole and willful ignorance is certainly the larger narrative, even beyond information security today. But that's all I'll say about that.
Ooh, man, that's such a segue into so many things. We could, yeah, I agree with that. I do think we're making at least our little pocket of the world, right? I mean, you can only kind of influence the things that you can influence, and in this pocket of the world and in my sphere of influence, I hope I'm making a positive change on that. But you're right, there's just a lot of people who, yeah, on your drive home today, you'll see some on the road. That's the only place where I really get like angry. I'm not an angry guy at all. Man, I still, when people cut me off, or I don't know, it's a whole other subject. All right. Well, I hope you guys got value. I think these are all recorded and available online if you want to send anybody to it. And hopefully there was some wisdom in all of this discussion. We'll do it again next month. Next month it is the blame game, which is another good chapter. You can kind of read into some of the things that are about the blame game. Hypocrisy, reprimand, attribution, a lot of things to talk about in the blame game. It's a good chapter. All right, we'll have a good rest of the day. I appreciate all you guys being here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.